Public Meeting Act.
Yes, it has, Mr. McEnroe.
Everybody please stand, join me with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Mr. Board Secretary.
Mr. Bauka.
Here.
Mrs. Baca.
Here.
Mr. Machado.
Present.
Mr. Brodzinski.
Here.
Mr. Syak.
Here.
Mrs. DePinto.
Here.
Mrs. Rakuya.
Here.
Mrs. Trapp.
Here.
And Mr. McEnroe.
Present. Dr. Alfano, there's a presentation on educational outputs and inputs achievements.
I'm going to have to ask the board to come around.
Thank you, Mr. McEnroe. Mr. Aguilas and I will be putting on a short presentation, and this is just a follow-up to what we started back in, I guess it was in the middle of the year, when we started talking about the output of education and output data and so on and so forth. So it's similar to what we're going to talk about today, educational outputs and inputs. My dissertation was on outputs and inputs, and subsequently we'll continue to talk more about the output than the input today rather than the output. And we always like to make, I like to make an analogy to athletics and sports and business and so on and so forth. But the output that we always look at is what the score is and so on and so forth for whether it be a football game or whatever. And the input is the practices and the skill building and the things of that nature and the watching and the films and everything else that goes into making a successful team. I'm sure George Najar and the state championship football team, they go over mounds of film. They constantly are drilling the players to try to get to a sophisticated play call so that when they enter the game, that the students and the team knows exactly what they need to do. We started discussing the output about 4 or 5 months ago, and we, society, really look at output from the perspective of how the schools are doing, your graduation rate. And there was a big article in the paper the other day on graduation rates, that basically now the state has taken the national formula, and a lot of the school districts in the state of New Jersey dropped 5, 6, 7 points based on the new formula. We're still doing relatively well, and we're about 3 or 4 students away from that, from the goal that we want to get, which is about 90%. We also talk about SAT scores, which is an output. We also talked about standardized tests, which is your HESPA, your New Jersey ASK. Those are all output, as well as attendance, as well as our attendance rate, our ADA, and how well, how many kids attend our school all the time. Again, that's output, as well as discipline and HIB reports and all this other stuff that we talk about. About 3 months ago, we talked about the output data about student growth models and student growth percentiles, and that now we're going to start doing longitudinal studies. Once again, a output-oriented and very significant. What we're planning to do in starting this meeting and then carrying over next year into the next school year for September, October, November, and et cetera. So we're going to start talking about inputs. And the biggest thing that we did this year in preparation for next year is that we put a very detailed strategic plan into place that will track what we do in regard to input and also assess how well we're doing in regard to that input. And what I'm going to allow my colleague to basically talk about what we'll be talking about in, let's say, the next 4 months when we come back September, October, November, and maybe December, is the input. What we do each and every day to get our students prepared, to get our children prepared to be successful academically, as well as to be good citizens and have great character. Mr. Aguilas, would you please do your part?
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Edward Aguiles. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction here in Sayreville. Dr. Alfano talked about what we've been doing as far as output and the information that we provide and the state provides on output, and I won't go into the ones that he just showed, but graduation rates, et cetera. One of the things that we are starting to look at is input. What are we doing? To use Dr. Alfano's analogy, if you want a better team, there's really only two things you can do. Either you get better players or you improve the players you have, or a combination of both. And usually the most successful teams have a combination of both. We're looking at that same approach with teaching. We're making certain that we hire and retain our best teachers and that we continue to improve upon the teachers that are here in district, as well as with administrators and down the line. One of the things that we introduced, although many teachers will tell you they've just heard about it this year or maybe last year, is the framework for teaching under what a lot of people will call the Danielson model. Charlotte Danielson has put together a framework for teaching that has become very popular. Although it's popular over the last couple of years, really we started working with the Danielson model under Mrs. Baumann, who was at that time the Director of Curriculum. She introduced the administrative staff to the frameworks so that we could start having frank discussions about what we're looking for in the classroom and what we consider effective teaching and good teaching. When Mrs. Eichner took over as the Director of Curriculum, she took that one step further, developing instructional committee teams where we were able to discuss frankly as administrators what we thought were good, effective practices, the best practices for the classroom and teaching. We also discussed being able to see with one vision, so that if I walked in and I saw a teacher teaching and Ms. Eigner walked in and she saw a teacher teaching, when we discussed the teacher's performance, we should be pretty close in our comparison of that teacher. Taking it one step further, this year we've introduced, one of the first things I did coming on board as the Director of Curriculum is introduce the electronic walkthrough, which really was basically taking the walkthroughs that Ms. Eichner has put together with the curriculum team and providing just a quicker analysis of the information we were seeing. One of the things that the electronic walkthrough allows us to do is gather data much more rapidly for not only the district, but per school, even per department. So although for some people Danielson model is new, we really have been working with it for 4 to 5 years now under 3 different directors of curriculum. One of the things that we're starting to work with, or one of the things that this has allowed us to do, is create a multi-tiered evaluation system, which consists of the electronic walkthroughs, the observations tools that is based on the Danielson model, and the evaluation tool, which is our excuse me, professional development tool for teachers, working with teachers for the following year, also based on the Danielson model. It also allows us to be ahead of the game for what the state of New Jersey is calling the educator evaluation in New Jersey. Sometimes you'll see it in the newspaper as the EE4NJ. Right now we have districts in the county that are scrambling to put together a observation tool that will fit the criteria, under EE4NJ. Sayreville, as you're about to see, is ahead of the curve in that regard. So what does the instrument have to look like according to the EE4NJ? I'll just call it EE from now on. I'm not going to read all of them, but just focusing on the first point, has a research or evidence base and produces scores or classifications that have been shown valid and reliable for the purpose as described herein. Sayreville's meeting that criteria already through the Danielson model and our observation tool. The last bullet aligns to and addresses each to 2011 INTESAC model core teaching standards that identify and describe effective teaching practices. Again, because of the Danielson model, Sayreville is meeting that criteria. And I get chastised sometimes for using acronyms and not explaining what they are. INTESAC stands for and I wrote it down so I wouldn't get it wrong, Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium. The reason that's important is that most of the states who are working on improving teacher and teacher evaluations are using the INTESAC model when creating their assessments. Again, Danielson not only meets the INTESAC model, but it also meets, excuse me, it also meets the MET study, which is short for the Measures of Effective Teaching. That study was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it meets it on two different fronts. It needs to provide a rubric, a measurable rubric, and looking at the second point, it needs to be focused on the learning environment, planning and preparation, instructional practices, and professional responsibilities. Again, Cerevel is meeting this criteria through the Danielson model. As we go through, as Dr. Alfano said, over the next few months, you'll get a better idea of what the Danielson model actually looks like and what we're working on. But if you ask any of the teachers in district what the Danielson model means, they'll talk to you about domains, 4 different domains, and each one of those domains is tied into one of those areas. So domain 1 would be the learning environment, domain 2 is planning and preparation, and the teachers have a specific rubric that outlines to them what we're looking for when we walk into a classroom in each of those 4 areas. The last bullet includes rubrics that assess teacher practices on a minimum of 4 levels. As far as performance rating, again, through our observation tool that uses the Danielson model, we meet that criteria. Basically, the criteria breaks teacher performance as unsatisfactory, basic, proficient, and distinguished. And as Dr. Danielson will say, distinguished is a nice place to visit, but you don't want to live there. Meaning that for a teacher to score at a distinguished level, it's at the highest performance level, and most teachers are really going to be in the basic or proficient areas. That doesn't mean that we don't try to get our teachers to the distinguished level and that the teachers don't try to work at the distinguished level, but it's an extremely challenging and difficult task to be distinguished in all areas of all 4 domains. I won't go through these and read these, but this is really the focus of the instrument now for the upcoming year. And as you can see, there are some dates that we'll be proficient by. The second bullet will have met this requirement by 2012, September of 2012. Most of the other ones we will be by either June or July of 2013. We will have met the criteria using this model. And again, these areas that are pointed out there, and it's at the bottom there, you can access off the website, you can access what the state is looking for and what they're asking us to provide as far as an evaluation tool. And we're very close to meeting all of the standards, all the criteria. We're very close to meeting them all, and we're doing it in a good timeline. Our mentoring program continues to be one of the best programs, and we continue to improve it on a yearly basis. One of the things that we did starting 2 years ago was to introduce for our novice teachers portfolio assessments, and I'm sorry, not portfolio assessments, but portfolios, where our non-tenured teachers in year 1, year 2, and now going into year 3 would provide a portfolio of the work they've done over the year, where they're able to discuss it at 3 different times during the year with either their principals, their vice principals, or their department heads, depending on, or their supervisors, depending on which building they're in. One of the things that we've looked at, Ms. Eichner and I, as far as moving ahead, was to take the portfolios and really focus them in, and again, tie them in, and we continue to tie them in to our strategic plan, which is our game plan, to focusing those portfolios to the domains, to the Danielson model, so that our teachers are working with us and we're working with them to improve their skills and their best practices in the classroom. And we're able to do that by having some conversations with them based on their portfolios. Dr.